So I think the best question to start with is how do you define DEI?
Well, that's a great question. By the way, first of all, thank you, Catherine. It's a real pleasure to be here. I look forward to an engaging conversation. And actually, it's interesting. You're probably the first person. I do a lot of podcasts and interviews, and usually they all start with the history. How did you get in this? And I like the fact that you kind of get to the heart of I think what has been one of the biggest issues with DEI is that even though the terms are used very casually and in many different settings, the definitions unfortunately have not been all that clear. And I think that part of the reason why this backlash has been so successful and so strong is precisely because some of the terms, especially the E and the I, the equity and inclusion, have been defined in many different ways by many different people. And so that creates some confusion, it creates some challenges, and it leaves it open for people to come in and you take those terms and co-opt them and turn them into something negative. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So we see terms like, oh, he's a DI candidate or she's a DI candidate used in a derogatory sense, or terms like woke that have been turned into an insult when they were actually meant to be something quite the opposite. And what's been interesting to me is to realize that people that I talk to that are not in DI, who only heard DI at first when they were told that to do training, whatever the case might be. The only definitions they ever heard of DI were negative ones, and so that creates this weird split where half of the population or some of the population see DI as a very positive thing, some is very negative. In my work, when I came into the space about 10 years ago, I came at it from a very analytical angle. And so my definitions came out of 10 years of doing research and applications for companies. And I realized something very important, which is that the first thing is inclusion. And so what I like to tell people is that from the point of view of an organization, inclusion is about what you do and diversity is what you get. And then I'll also explain why I say that equity is what you want. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But why do I say that? Well, because ultimately, in an organization, and by the way, I'm careful to define in an organization because sometimes people talk about inclusion in terms of how people feel, and that's great. But there's a difference between a company being inclusive and a person feeling included. Those are not the same thing. They may be linked, but they're not the same thing. So I'm very careful to say, from the point of view of an organization,